Welcome to Women on Wisdom. I'm your host, Sandra Boyd, and this is where real stories meet urgent truth. It's estimated that it will take nearly 124 years to close the gender gap. That's just way too long. We can no longer depend on governments, workplaces, or even women's groups to lead the change. It's up to us to have the tough conversations, challenge old stories, and reclaim our power. The time for waiting is over. The movement starts now, one woman at a time. Welcome to the Women on Wisdom podcast series. In episode 2, we will explore how women can tap into their intuition and practice mindfulness to navigate the complexities of the modern world. We'll delve into the intersection of science and intuition, offering insights from Jennifer Spencer, a renowned intuitive medium with over 100,000 followers on Instagram, alongside Dr. Dana Lee Bagley, clinical psychologist and internationally recognized human behavioralist. They will both discuss the power of self-awareness, decision-making, and emotional intelligence. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Harnessing Mindfulness and Intuition. My guests today are Jennifer Spencer, medium and intuition coach with over 100,000 followers on Instagram, and Dr. Dana Lee Bagley, clinical psychologist and internationally recognized expert in human behavior. This is the battle of science versus intuition. Hello, ladies. I am so excited to have you on the show. But first, let's find out a little bit about each of you. And we'll start with Dana, if you want to give us an overview of who you are, where you've been, and where you're going.
Awesome. Well, thank you. So I'm Dr. Dana Lee Bagley. I have a PhD in clinical psychology, and I primarily work in workplaces now, trying to make less soul-sucking workplaces. And we do this by helping to train leaders in the messy side of leading humans, and also to help employees have science-backed daily coping strategies to stay grounded and accountable. I also do research, and sorry, Sandra, it's not going to be much of a battle. You're going to find out there's actually a lot of science supporting intuition, just to put a teaser out there, right? And so I also do research at Dalhousie University and St. Mary's University.
Well, you know, Dana, I'm Irish. I like a battle every once in a while. So, and Jennifer, give us a little bit of an overview of your background.
Yeah, so I'm an intuitive coach, a spiritual medium, and also the co-founder of Pause and Expand. And Pause and Expand is a wellness company that my partner Steve and I created after the pandemic. And we've worked with over 200 plus companies. I think I've lost count up to this point. And we use sound and visualization to really slow people down and develop new awareness. And in my previous life, before I became a spiritual medium and an intuitive coach, I worked in the corporate world. So I was working in the corporate world for over 15 years in senior level roles in marketing for companies like Wattpad and Body Shop and other fashion retailers.
It's amazing, and we're going to find out more about that shift. But the first question that I have for both of you is for us to talk about a time where intuition has impacted our lives. In the little story I'm going to tell actually changed the course of my life. And so I'd love to hear from you, because this is what we're talking about today. Who would like to go first?
I can go. So one of the things that I always talk about in the work that I do leading women is that there's really these 3 parts of our soul. So there's our instinct, our intellect, and our intuition. And I'm learning that my best decisions will come when those 3 areas of my soul, of myself, are in balance, in harmony. And I like to think of intuition as really that part of us that feels and knows, but doesn't always know why. And so when I think about a decision that I made in my life that really shaped the course of how I live now, it was the decision I made when I left the corporate world and decided to become a spiritual medium and an intuitive coach. And it's funny, when I was thinking about this question and sort of looking back, those moments where you think that you're a little bit crazy for making the decision you're making, but you still have to do it anyways. That was one of those moments for me. And, I remember the day that I consciously decided I wanted to leave the corporate world and start to move in a different direction. And all of the parts of my mind would say, how are you going to make money? You're going to be unable to sustain yourself. You're going to lose the validation of the VP title. And so the logic part of my brain was in overdrive in that big part of my life. And yet there was something inside of me. There was this like heart-centered intuitive knowing that was like, no, you're meant to do something else. You're meant to actually lead and guide women in a different way. And it's funny because looking back now on the other side, I now have more income than I ever had in the corporate world doing what I do and what I love. And I realized that the version of me back then that was so scared to make that choice, it was really a series of small decisions that I made that led me closer to where I am today and what I'm doing today. And I realize now too that moving with logic throughout that part of my life when I was trying to shift my entire identity from who I was then to who I am now, my logic would have only gotten me so far. And it was really my intuition that took me to where I am today.
I got to ask you, did any of your friends and family or just people that you worked with say, are you out to lunch?
Yeah.
Are you crazy?
100%. So I always love this part of my journey. My dad's an accountant and love him to death, but he is a very type A logical human being. And so sometimes when I hear that voice of, are you crazy? I'm like, is that my voice or is that my dad's voice? Like who is speaking here? And I remember, I come from a family where, all of my family members have worked in stable corporate jobs for their whole life. And so for me to be the first entrepreneur in my family was a huge leap. And thank God I had my partner, Steve, to sort of guide me along the way. But yes, 100%. And that's where you really have to just keep trusting that part of you that knows and really believe that where you're going is better than where you are. And now it's funny because I look back and my dad's the first one to comment on my Instagram posts and talk about, how I'm doing. Oh, my daughter's got this big following on Instagram. So it all works out in the end. But in the moment, it doesn't feel that way.
Wow. What a leap of faith, really. Following your intuition. Great example. Dana, how about you?
Yeah, honestly, I can tell a very similar story because I had a previous life where I was a healthcare worker. I worked in the medical, surgical, and cancer care units. I was a frontline worker for wave 1 and wave 2 of the pandemic. And it was also, again, that it was, so the work was hard, like things were difficult in the hospital, but also it just kind of seemed like the mental health needs of the planet had exploded and it wasn't where we were supposed to be. And I knew this, right, for a long time. But I fought it for a long time because being a healthcare provider was such a big part of my identity. And so I actually applied for several more jobs before, and they looked fine. And then when I got to the interviews, I was like, this is like the furthest job. I should never take this job. Like this job is the worst possible job for me, right? I applied for several, and finally I was like, okay, universe, I get it, right? And it was like, I'd known the whole time, but I fought it for quite a long time. And so a similar like life-changing kind of course. But I also wanted to say that there was part of, I think sometimes we also want to think about the small decisions we make, not just the life-changing ones, right? So there was some intuition in saying yes to doing this podcast, right? So I have met Sandra before, liked her a lot, had never met Jennifer before, and so there was a piece of it that just was like, oh yeah, for sure. Like this just feels good. Like I'm just going to do it because it feels good. You know what I mean? And it's sometimes those little decisions that add up as well as to where you go in the world. Right. And so I just wanted to also highlight there's these life-changing ones, but there's also like these daily little ones that you can also make use of all those parts of yourself.
It's really interesting because I guess when I first met you were at the beginning of your entrepreneurial career. You had just stepped out of the sort of the corporate world, and now, and I just have to bring this up because anybody that goes to Dana's LinkedIn will see that she's just won an entrepreneur award, And so your intuition was leading you in the, and maybe you can just say a little bit about that that award that you've just won, because I won't talk about the crazy video, but tell us a little bit
Yeah, it's
about
a great
that.
teaser if you want to see it on LinkedIn. It's a really fun video of
It's
like the winner
fun.
is. Yeah. And so, yeah, we've been developing. So part of the reason I wanted to leave the hospital, I was doing therapy for one-on-one therapy for cancer patients, which is clearly a very meaningful thing to do. But again, I was like, one-on-one therapy is not going to cut it. Like this will never be enough. And so part of the mission from that point forward was how do we make scalable, accessible, access to science-backed information. And so we've developed several tech products, including an app, because of course there's an app for that, right? That's part of, our training system and helps people actually practice and change culture in the workplace so that it's not just a one-time workshop. It's actually a workshop plus these digital tools that help people change over time. And so that's what the award was for, was, our new kind of all-in-one package. We talked about it like, an all-inclusive vacation. Like when you don't opt in for the all-inclusive and you realize the drinks are like $19 each and you're like, I should have gone with the all-inclusive. So that's what we're trying to do with our training programs in the workplace, is to just make it easy, one package that trains both leaders and employees. And so that's what the award was for.
Oh my gosh, that's so awesome. I just have to share with you because, this topic, I've been really big on my intuition and following my intuition. I've shared with Jennifer, there was a very short period of time in my life, which was recently, where I was under a lot of stress, and I felt like my intuition left me. And I ended up getting in touch with it by taking this 12-week meditation course. But I wanted to share something that was really personal. And this is going back, it'll be 36 years this year, or this July, is I woke up one morning and I decided that I wasn't going to work. Now, for me, for no reason, I wasn't sick. There was no mental health days in those days. I have never done it since. And but that morning I woke up, I got dressed, I put my makeup on, I went downstairs, I made my coffee, and the doorbell rang. And my husband, who had taken the day off, said that he was driving the opposite way and decided he would check and come down my street and check and see if I would be home. This was a work day. And he knocked on the door and he said he had no idea what he was going to say to me if I was to answer the door. But I answered the door with, ready to go. And he said, do you want to go to breakfast? And I said, yes. And we've been together every day since. But I woke up that morning knowing I shouldn't go to work. And no reason, not sick, which anybody who knows me knows that doesn't happen. So that's and I've had many, many intuition stories, like I'm sure you all do. But when we think about, I want to talk about the workplace specifically, which has always been very male dominated. The cultures are male dominated. Everything's, on imperial data. Most of my life, if I was to say, well, my intuition is telling me this, they'd look at you like you had lost your mind. How is that changing right now? Why is it changing? Why do you think, from your perspective? And I'm going to start, let's start with Jennifer, what your thoughts are.
Yeah. So, I think in a world where, as you said, we are wired to look for the metrics, it's ingrained in us as a society, right? To look for the cause effect, to look for well, if this happens, then this is going to be the result. And I think as the world starts to change, even on an emotional and energetic level, we're starting to realize that we're feeling things. We're feeling a lot more than maybe not what we used to, but we're starting to become more aware of how much we're feeling and how much is going on around us. And so I think that what we're starting to learn is that, you're seeing the power of emotional intelligence be very much at the forefront of when you look for a role now, it's about how do you show up with people? How do you interact? How can you connect in a different way? And a lot of times when I was interviewing for roles early on in my career, that was never a question that was asked. It was like, how do you manage conflict, but not how do you relate to people on an emotional level? And I think that if I was interviewing someone today, that would be the first question I would ask. And so the other thing I really look at with my own career is when I look back on some of the most influential moments of my career, moments when I was in a marketing role, I made a decision, I went against the grain. They were running a global campaign at the body shop. And I was like, I got to do something different in Canada. It wasn't based on metrics. It wasn't based on facts. It was based on, I don't know why. I just feel like we have to explore this. And then the metrics came afterwards. So I think what's starting to happen is we're becoming a little more, we're feeling a little bit more safe to actually lead with intuition, lead with the part of us that says, I feel like this might be the right candidate to hire. I feel like this might be the decision to move with. I feel like this client may not be the client I thought they were, right? Sandra, you and I have talked so many times about those intuitive moments where we knew about something, but we didn't know exactly who, what, why, when, how. And then we later realized, oh, that was why we did that thing. That's why we made the decision we made. And I think that
Yes.
as we start as a collective to share more of those stories, right? Just like the one you shared, just like the one Dana shared, we start to create more safety for each of us to go, we're shifting, we're changing. And because we can't rely on metrics as much as we used to. We can, but it's, again, as I said, it's only going to take us so far. We're starting to realize that greater results are going to come from the intuitive with the logic connected.
I couldn't agree more. I remember this is going back years and years ago, and I remember saying to my then leader, I have a feeling we should be doing this. And he looked at me and goes, Sandra, hope is not a strategy. And I said, it's not hope. I have a feeling. I have an intuition. And then as we ended up working together 10 years, he goes, okay, what's your intuition on this? But that was, but it always showed up like that. I just feel like this is, like you said, you made a decision when you were at the body shop. Dana, so tell me your thoughts and why there's more acceptance. It's not everywhere. People are still, leery. However, there's big shifts going on in the corporate world.
Yep. So I think the shifts are happening everywhere. And in part, we see some shifts also like in science and in a way that gives us then some of this data, some understanding of it. So for example, we can understand a bit of the neurobiology of intuition. There's systems in our brains, sometimes called system 1 and 2 by Kahneman. And he talks about that there's a quick system that is collecting all kinds of information, but it's unconscious. We don't have direct access to it. And then there's like system 2, which is kind of our logical version. And so the automatic unconscious version is collecting all kinds of information and putting it together in novel ways. So it's putting it together in ways that we don't in our logical system. And so that's why we get these like creative intuitions. It's like when you solve a problem in the shower, right? Because that part of your brain is solving it in the background and putting together things that we wouldn't think to put together in our logical brain. And so we get some of that information. There are kind of changes to the workplace overall as well. I personally am one of the my version is to infiltrate a system, and then once I get enough power in it to try to change the system, right? So we see some of that happening as well. There's, an anecdote about the fact that women apologize in the office more in the workplace more than men. And so then this narrative shows up about, we should teach women they don't need to apologize so much. But maybe women are apologizing the exact right amount. Maybe men are not apologizing enough. And so we get to have those kinds of conversations.
I just gotta stop right there. And I want you to repeat that again, because I think this is I am one of those people that used to go around. I mean, if you bump into me, I would say sorry. I was always apologizing. And I know so many of my female colleagues and friends. Can you say that one more time?
Yeah. So maybe it's not that women are apologizing too much. Maybe they're apologizing the exact right amount. And actually men should be apologizing more. Right. So this is the
Yes.
frame of reference problem, right? Who are we treating as normal and who are we comparing that to? And I think as workforces become more diverse, both visible and invisible forms of diversity, when you make use of that diversity, companies do better. Their bottom lines do better, right? They have better retention. They have, better profits. Like there's a ton of data to support that. But it means that we have to, make space for different ways of thinking about things and processing information, like including intuition and gut feelings in decision making. That actually, is taking advantage of diversity. And then we see that there are great benefits for companies when they do that.
Do you think, and you do a lot of work in the corporate world, I know you both do work in the corporate world, do you feel, and I want to ask Jennifer this question as well, do you feel that little by little there's an opening for that female energy coming into the workplace? Given the stat that this podcast is based on, 123 years, that's multiple generations before there's equality. And, so we're here to talk about bridging that gap. But the feminine, I still feel that there's so much of that masculine energy. And I went along with it because that's what you did as I grew up in the corporate world. Do you think, do you see changes as you're working with corporations right now?
Again, this is why you want to have diversity, such as like women in leadership positions, right? Because you can actually change the system. So in one of the organizations I worked with, we actually decided that all of the committee heads could be co-leads, that you didn't have to have just one leader, you could have a co-lead. And so when you had two leaders running the committee, that actually allowed more diverse people to take those positions because they could trade off, right? And studies show you don't get 50% of each, you get like 75% of each, even when they're sharing the role. So you get like way more when you have co-leads, right? But for the executive roles, there were bylaws where you couldn't co-lead the president, position or those kinds of things. And so you see these like structures that we run into and these system problems that we run into. But I think it's really important for us to take those steps. There's studies showing sometimes, women don't want to get into leadership positions because it feels like I'm going to be corrupted. I'm going to become one of those bad CEOs or evil CEOs if I take on that leadership position, right? But studies actually show that you become more of yourself when you get more power. And so we actually need like good people getting into positions of power because they're more themselves and they make good use of that power, right? It doesn't have to be power over other people. It can be power to, right? Power to empower, power to, change, power to support. And so we actually need women in these positions, and diverse people in these positions because then it can change the system, right? You can change the system, and then again, that's a virtuous cycle where you see leaders being different, and then you realize I could be that, right? And then you get more diverse companies, and so I think it's inevitable because change happens, right? And we can do that kind of. You can take advantage of that, do that well, or you can do it like kicking and screaming, right? And it's just going to slow you down. If you're a company that's kicking and screaming about it, it's just going to slow you down and waste your time. So if you can figure out how to embrace it and make use of it, again, we can help your bottom line when you embrace it.
But we're seeing a lot of backlash right now in the world, and these groups.
Leadership really matters, and I think the United States is a great example of leadership really matters, and who you get into leadership position makes a big difference. And so be thoughtful about who are in your leadership positions and what messages they are sending, right? I think it also requires and forces people to stand up for what they believe in, right? You can't just be complicit if saying nothing is the status quo supports the status quo, right? And so you only, can make change when lots of people work together on these things. It's not a solo pursuit.
Yeah, absolutely. So Jennifer, I'd love to hear your thoughts on if you see the door opening up in the corporate world to allowing that more feminine energy to step in. And, as you both know, I've just started, my own business with Talent Wise Collective with my partners. But, I wasn't, as somebody who's been a leader and an executive for so many years, I wasn't seeing it as much as I thought it should be at this point at my age and state in my career. So I'd love to hear your thoughts from the work that you're doing.
Yeah. So one of the things that that's been really powerful for us with the work we do at Pause and Expand. So we go into companies and we use sound and visualization to help teams slow down. And what we're noticing with those experiences is we're creating containers of safety, essentially. And sound and visualization is in essence a very feminine energy because it is nurturing. It's opening up to feeling. It's opening up to the part of you that many of us block and have armor around. And one of the things that I've learned, and it's been really amazing to watch, is that oftentimes in corporate, we haven't created spaces for people to feel safe, to actually to feel things that are happening. And so when I do experiences with people, Steve and I will see tons of men, tons of women showing up in these containers and being vulnerable. Even the question when you ask someone, how are you feeling right now, right? You can answer that question and say, oh, I'm good, or oh, I'm good and tired and hungry. Or you can actually go deeper and say, I feel really uncomfortable, or I'm feeling super overwhelmed with what's going on. And before, that used to be something that we would not talk about at work. But now we're learning that when we can create those spaces of safety, then people, regardless of who they are, men or women, have safety to feel and to trust that they are allowed to share what's really going on. And I think that's what creates the container for all of us to then open up to the more intuitive, the more emotional part of us that we've previously felt like we had to hide because it wasn't safe to do that. So it's been really rewarding to see it. And I am noticing a lot more men stepping up to the table and
Yes.
showing up and putting their cameras on and sharing what's really going on. Because, I think from the other side, we also recognize men are typically not allowed to feel, right? Traditionally, men have been taught, well, toughen up and don't show the vulnerable side. And even the work that Steve does with men's groups, there's a lot of recalibration that's needing to be required in order for both of us to feel like we can come to the table and feel connected and safe and ready to let the walls down and actually share what's going on under the surface.
Yeah, I'll just add to that, men are only allowed to feel angry and want sex. Those are the two emotions that they're allowed. So everything that they're feeling has to be like wrapped up in like either feeling angry or wanting sex. And so it's also to say like that the patriarchy that like says you can't have feelings and that's wrong and bad, it hurts men also, right? It for sure, we see it in those systemic reasons why women are not in leadership positions, right? But it also damages men. And so it's to everyone's benefit. And, the safety that Jennifer is talking about, we study that as psychological safety, right? So beyond kind of your physical safety, your psychological safety, is it safe to be a real, authentic, messy human? And again, studies show that when you build psychological safety, it benefits the employees and it also benefits the organization. The most effective teams are the ones who have psychological safety.
Wow. So you on the science side, it's psychological safety. On Jennifer and the work that you're doing, it's containers, it's containment, it's safe, those safe containers. Is it containers? I'm sorry. I just want to make sure I've
Yeah.
got it right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that I think about being in a boardroom with with mostly men and sitting there, and there's a couple of things. There's a couple of rules as a woman I knew. Never cry, ever. Do not cry because your vulnerability, you can't control your emotions. All of those things are that to me that would have been the most mortifying thing that I could have done in the workplace, in a setting, when I was in a room. The other thing that happened to me, was menopause. being in a room where, if you look at my coloring, and we talk about this on our first episode with Kirsten and Patricia, you look at my coloring. If I get a hot flash, like it's like from head to toe, I'm red. And it was once even assumed that I was embarrassed about what I was saying or I was feeling. So, all of these things, but my intuition and my thought was to contain it all, but not in a way that it was safe. It was, pushing it down. And that was because if I didn't push it down, it was going to hurt me. And so the idea of femininity and intuition and being creeping into, and thank God for wives and daughters teaching men that they have to make some shifts. And there are men out there. I have incredible men in my life. I'm very fortunate to have that. But Jennifer, I'd like to, you have over 100,000 followers on Instagram. I think you hit it recently. I think you're at like 108,000 now, the last time I checked. But, it keeps growing like crazy. And you set out the fact that you do these packages, these coaching packages on intuition and spirituality and all the rest of it. And you've got women like me who, and I just want to do this on a sidebar. I was first introduced to Jennifer. I was asked if I would meet her on multiple occasions and was told the work she did. And because, would I be interested in meeting Jennifer because she could come and be part of our coaching group? And I'm like, no, we don't do that kind of coaching. No, we don't do that kind of coaching. And then I ended up taking this meditation course in a time in my life where it completely transformed my thinking. And, but I just want to say, so the women that are showing up are not all of, what do they use that expression, woohoo? You've got women like me who've been hardcore, traditional, corporate. Kirsten, my partner, used to call me boardroom Sandra, where, I'd show up a certain way. So what do you think are some of the shifts that this is almost like a breakdown of, or breakthrough. I'm going to say breakthrough, not breakdown.
Yeah. So, it's been interesting as I've opened up more to my journey, how much I'm finding women that either have a similar experience or are either like a few steps ahead or a few steps behind where I am in my specific journey. And I think honestly, a big reason why what I'm sharing is resonating is because so many women are waking up to who they are and asking the bigger questions. And that comes in the form of like, what is my purpose? What has my identity been up until this moment? And how do I want to potentially show up different if I start to take away the belief system that I have to be a certain kind of person? And the root of that is that we have this intuition that's literally sitting dormant in so many of us. And that's the gateway to actually accessing the wisdom, right? I always say to the women that I work with, you have all the answers. I'm just here to hold space for you to be able to realize what you literally already know. And we live in a world now where we are in so much distraction. We are in so much energy of trying to get the next thing done. I know you totally, both of you relate to this. Get the next thing done, cross the thing off the list. For me, it's always been, now it used to be about my work, and now it's, well, get to 109,000 followers, get to 110. It's a game, right?
It doesn't stop.
It's a never ending cycle. But the truth is that the work that I do is most powerful when I literally slow down. I ask myself, what is needed right now? If you look at the women around you, you look at the questions of people that are asking you for help, what is the truth of what they need? And most of the time, it's not the answer they need. It's that they need the space. And this is why I talk about containers, right? Spaces where we can come, we can feel accepted in all parts of us, the parts that are like, am I a lunatic for trying to think this way? also the part of us that is like, wait, I know that I can do this. I call that our higher self, right? The version of you that knows without a doubt that you can get to where you want to go. And how do we create the space and the safety for us to feel like I can actually go do that thing. I can step away from what I've been doing and I can actually follow what I'm here to do, what my gifts are, what my calling is on that deeper level. So, I can talk about how, I've been consistent and I've, shown up at a certain background and all these different things. But the truth of it is that we want to feel seen and like we can actually know why we're here, and we are waking up primarily because of a lot of stuff going on around us, right?
Yes.
We're waking up to the truth of who we really are at the core.
So well said. Dana, what's the intersection between mindfulness and intuition on a scientific point of view?
I can add, that the emotional exhaustion part of burnout isn't fixed with rest. It's actually fixed with reigniting a sense of meaning and purpose. And so, the topics that Jennifer's talking about are also, part of the evidence-based system, that I'm trained in and that I use for all of my training. And I notice this often about different systems that work is that they often have the same elements. They're just called different things in the different systems, right? And so in our system, it's called values, and values have a very specific meaning about who do you want to be? How do you want to show up? So it's not what you want to get from the world, but it's what you want to give to the world. And that is how we find meaning and purpose, right? And we have to be willing to feel uncomfortable and do difficult things in order to live a value-driven life. And again, it's actually even more important to figure out what you want to contribute to the world when life feels like a dumpster fire, right? So when life is like easy, like it's not as big of a deal. But like when life's a dumpster fire, it especially matters who you want to be. It especially matters what you are adding to the world and what you are contributing to the world. And values also have this aspect of them, of that sort of felt sense of knowing that Jennifer describes, right? That there's an emotional quality to values that no one has to explain to you that this matters to you or this is how you want to show up. It just feels right. And it's motivating to move towards what matters, right? And it's always about moving towards what matters, not getting away from something bad. Also, just trying to get away from something bad does not guarantee you get somewhere better, right? It's about using those values as a compass to help make decisions about what you want to do with your life and how you want to show up. And ultimately, so people can live more vibrant lives, right? So if your life was a painting, is it full of color? And it requires doing difficult things to have a really vibrant life. And so I find that a lot of these systems, have similar concepts, even though they're kind of named different things. The ones that work, they are tapping into similar elements. Mindfulness or present moment awareness is part of the system as well. And so, we know that mindfulness has a huge impact on well-being. Similar to the way exercise is like a great thing for you and it just does lots of good things for you if you exercise. It's very similar with mindfulness, right? Or meditation, that we know it does good things for people. And I especially like helping people make use of it in their day-to-day lives, right? So for sure, part of the practice sometimes is like sitting and doing a meditation practice or a mindfulness practice for like 5 or 20 minutes. But it's also about being present for your life. Like being where you are, right? The present moment awareness. So how do we use that mindfulness to show up and to be present for the things that are happening and not get pulled by your thoughts to the past or the future? That's the skill that mindfulness teaches you, is how not to get caught up in your thoughts so that you can be right here. Because this is actually the only moment we actually have, right? Is this one right here. We spend a lot of time in the past and the future. We spend a lot of time not in our 5 senses, right? There's kind of a thinking mode and there's a being mode. And North Americans are great at the thinking, doing mode, right? Not so much in the being mode. And the being mode is part of that mindfulness skill of being present and not getting, it's not about having an empty mind, just to like clarify that, right?
No.
It's not about having an empty mind, because that actually probably means some kind of brain damage if you're having no thoughts at all, like, right? And so that's not what we're aiming for. It's that you have thoughts, but you don't get hooked by them. You don't get pulled away and more realistically, you notice that you've gotten pulled away and you have the ability to come back, right? The skill is the coming back. It's the coming back again and again and again, right? It's a rinse and repeat skill. Often people think this like it's a watershed moment that like suddenly I'm a different human, and it's not.
No.
It's that you have to like practice these things and show up and choose them again and again and again. And so, yeah, we know that this is good for people in all kinds of different ways. And again, for me and the work that I do, it's ultimately so that people can live better lives, more meaningful lives, which doesn't mean easier lives, right? Doesn't mean less painful lives. It means more vibrant lives. And that actually requires us to have some distress tolerance to be able to do meaningful things.
Yeah, I love the point that you make about life being difficult. And I don't know if you are, either of you are familiar with the book, The Road Less Traveled, which is one of the all-time best-selling books ever. And the first line of that book is, life is difficult. And so, however, the 50% of the population are women. And it is more difficult for them because they face more violence, more poverty, and more discrimination in everyday life. But I was thinking, some of the things that you said, and Jennifer, certainly in the conversations that we've had, is when I went through a period of time when I couldn't access my intuition, it was because I didn't take time to do it. And I didn't know this while I was going through it. Both my parents were ill. My son was ill. I was in overload at work. I was trying to manage I was trying to be all things to all people. And I was, grieving the loss of, my parents and who they were and, illness and all the rest of it. And it wasn't until I went through that meditation course that was I able to reconnect with my intuition, which meant I became, more the thought leader and the creative person that I was previously. I couldn't make decisions for this period of time. And so how with meditation practice, it gives you all of this freedom and this ability to be, to access yourself and to be, engaged in your life. How do we stop when we're in the middle of craziness like I was? It actually took I couldn't stop. It took that course to stop me. So I'd love to hear from, both from a scientifically point of view, how do we access this? What should we be doing? And Jennifer, why don't you start and then we'll let Dana dive in.
Yeah, I mean, I think Dana really touched on it a little bit earlier when you were talking about the way it needs to look, right? So that's something that Steve and I teach a lot in the work we're doing, especially in the corporate world, is we think that it has to look a certain way, right? So we've been taught that, when I first learned meditation, it was you sit in a lotus position, your legs are going to like die because you're cramping. And you have to sit there for a long period of time and keep your eyes closed and like let go of thoughts. And then it becomes unachievable because most people can't do it. They can't sit for that long. And it feels like, well, how long do I have to do it for? What's the time that I need to do it? Those are the questions we typically get asked when we lead courses around meditation for teams. And the truth is that meditation is a moving practice, and your intuition is the strongest when you slow down. That's where your intuition has room and space to breathe and to actually feel what is going on in your physical body. And I'm sure Dana can talk about that. And so what I learn is meditation for me sometimes looks like that 2-minute window when I turn on my electric toothbrush and I'm brushing my teeth in front of the mirror, right? That's when I meditate because it's like white noise and I meditate. I have to do it for a certain amount of time until it turns off. And I just reflect on, what did I notice about today? What do I want tomorrow to be about? Right. And that's enough. And so what I'm learning is when we can have these moments, Sandra, I know for you, it's like when you go out walking, right?
Yes.
You can do meditation anywhere. It's a living, breathing practice that exists in every moment of your day. However, the awareness is, what am I noticing is either taking me in the fear, like Dana said, going into the future, like, oh my gosh, everything's going to implode. What is that voice? Or what am I ruminating on about the past that I wish I could have changed that I have no control over? So really at the end of the day, we're just trying to let go of control. We're trying to open our hearts a little more fully to love. And the idea of meditation as a practice is what helps us to do that, which ultimately is just becoming aware.
Yeah. So, Sandra, you talked about, how do we stop? Like, how do we realize that we need to stop, right? And so in a lot of our trainings, we're teaching people basically to become more aware. And we try to get them to be more aware of their energy levels, so their battery, and then their stress thermometer, so that they get some early warning signs. Because again, often people don't stop until they're in a huge health crisis, right? Where they actually have no choice but to stop. And so there's an expression that, if you don't listen to your body when it whispers, it will start to roar. And so often people wait until they're in crisis. And so we're trying to get them to notice these signs and signals, particularly in their body, behavior, emotions, earlier on, so that they can get themselves back to like a steady state on an ongoing basis. So it's like a daily practice about how's my battery, right? Where's my stress thermometer, and what do I need to do to like charge my battery intentionally, and how am I using that battery? It's kind of a terrible idea that we've done in our culture, that if you just try harder, you can do anything you want, right? It's not. It's a fixed amount. The battery is a fixed amount. So you have to make choices about how you use it. I would often have, professional women coming for therapy and being like, I need to be better, more effective, get through my to-do list faster. Like, can you help me do that? And I'd be like, no, you actually need to learn to fall apart more effectively, right? So that's about how do you ask for and accept help? How do you recognize, again, that you're in early signs of stress versus like the crisis form of stress? We have this idea that, if we ask for help, that's taking something from the other person, but actually both people can end up with more batteries, right? It's not a zero-sum game. And so if you've ever felt good helping somebody else out, right, that's what you're denying other people the opportunity to if you won't accept help from them. And if you've ever like had a friend, loved one, family member who's refusing help, and you can see that they're struggling, but they're refusing help, that is way more stressful than if they would just let you help them, right? One of my clients, her mother had a heart attack and drove herself 3 hours to the hospital because she refused to have somebody else drive her, right? And so again, we talk about the need for psychological flexibility, and that means you can do different things. So it means you can think and do when you need to think and do, but it also means you can be when you need to be. And it's about helping people add to their toolkit. It's not replacing it. You can continue to think as much as you want, right? But do you have also the ability to be, right? So yeah, you're great at helping everybody else out and taking, making sure everything's running smoothly, but how are you at accepting help? How are you at, because really often we need to add extra batteries to the system, right? That it's not actually possible for one person to do all those things, that you need help. And so learning to fall apart more effectively becomes the goal, right? And then they ask for a checklist for how to fall apart more effectively. Like, no, not how
that
it works.
would be me.
Right? Okay, I'll do this. What's the checklist for falling apart more effectively? Yeah,
That would be you, Sandra. I love it. I love that you know that about yourself.
I so would do that. I mean, when I was at the worst point of this sort of breakthrough, we'll call it, I had these crazy skin infections in my eyes where I had to go to the eye doctor every single day. And I was still getting on, and I mean, I looked hideous. People would step away from me when they would see me out in public. I would still be working and doing everything until, when I started this meditation class, one of the instructors said to me, she goes, so Sandra, how many healthy summers do you think you have left in your life to enjoy? Because I was talking about, I'm too busy to take vacation, and it was going into the summer. And I went, what? And she said, well, how many healthy summers do you have left? And, based on, the formula of when you're, you're going to live or die. And when she asked me that question, it stopped me in my tracks. I decided at that point I was taking a 3-week vacation with no contact at work. The eye infection went away. I was incorporating my meditation. I came back a completely different person than when I looked. I even looked differently. So I think
Yeah.
what you're saying, but people like me, I need to work on the lesson. And, you hit the nail on the head, like the checklist. Like if you would have said, here's a checklist to falling apart, I would have followed it line by line.
Of course you
This is
would.
what you do. And both of you have given me, I mean, I'm working hard on these changes. You both have given me advice on how to show up a little bit differently and even just free fall a little. I'm still working on it. But getting down,
I would say,
go ahead,
Sandra,
go ahead.
I would say that, we, again, always want to empower the individual, right, with these kinds of skills and habits to, because again, none of us are guaranteed tomorrow, right? Do not wait. I've spent a lot of time with people dying because of the work that I did at the hospital, and not a single person ever said on their deathbed, like, oh, if my floors had just been cleaner, I could die peacefully. Like that's what's missing. I just need cleaner. Like no one's ever like, oh, if I just worked more overtime, I could die peacefully. Said no one ever, right? It's always about people. It's always about relationships. It's always about the things they didn't do, right? But not about whether they had clean floors and like worked overtime. And so absolutely you should take the moment, like every moment that you have. And so I also just wanted to point out, as you've said before, that even when we empower the individual, there's also these systemic problems as well. And I like the analogy of the canaries in the coal mine, right? So they had canaries in coal mines to warn the miners that there was low oxygen, and basically it was a toxic work environment. But no one ever said that the canaries needed to do more self-care. Right? No one ever said that the canaries just needed to be more resilient and then they could have withstood that toxic work environment, right? And women do face more systemic problems, right? There is more systemic issues and stressors that they face. We know that working women work basically as much at home, like in the unpaid labor in the home, as women in the 40s did who didn't work outside the home. So they're doing like double the amount of work. They're working full time and they're doing all of, a huge amount of work at home as well. That's again, unpaid and unacknowledged. And so there are these systemic things. And we've talked about, you mentioned menopause. There's so many systemic problems, in healthcare and how women's health is treated. I often would say, that if like every woman, if you live long enough, goes through menopause. And so if there was something that every man went through that caused this kind of disruption, 15% of women leave the workforce due to unmanaged menopause symptoms, right? Yeah. It would be like a huge industry, right? And so that's also systemic reasons why we don't have a whole bunch of options for women and treatment, and that's changing, and we hope it does, right? And so it's just to balance those two things. Is yes, we absolutely want to empower individuals, and also we're acknowledging, the systemic things that also need changing.
Yeah, we're going to be bringing you back on the show to specifically talk about menopause. I know my partner Patricia has also some really big thoughts on that. Any sort of closing thoughts? I've got 2 more questions that I want to ask, but Jennifer, like just about the connection and the intersection between mindfulness and intuition.
Yeah, I mean, I think from what we've talked about, what's really promising is that we're talking about it more, right? There's more awareness about it. And I think that with anything, the more we can have these conversations and feel like it's acceptable, the more we can actually change. So I think it's really promising from what I've been seeing and how I've been noticing organizations starting to bring these moments of importance more into the cultures, even though we still have work to do.
Yeah. And you know what I love right now? I'm obviously a lot older than both of you. But this sort of idea of the wisdom not being about, I've lived for 70, 80, 90 years. It's about knowledge and expertise and opening up and listening. And I just learning from different generations of women. I got to sit in a room of a younger woman who was 40 having major issues with her mother, and have a bunch of women who were much older, one 10, 20, 30 years older than this young woman, impart their wisdom about how she could handle the relationship. And I think I love that more and more of this is happening. I'm seeing more and more of it where
Yeah.
women are coming together, especially with what's happening. You talked about the U.S. and, women are standing up of all generations. And so,
And I'd say sometimes, when life is a dumpster fire, you're like, okay, I don't have time for this BS, right? I don't have time for all these like things that I have done because I should or because like society tells me I should, right? I just don't have time for that stuff. I'm going to like focus on the stuff that really matters, right? And so we often accept the definitions that are put upon us, like what's a good mom, what's a good, employee, what's a good leader. And we don't have to. You can choose, again, in a value-driven way of like, who do you want to be and what kind of mom do you want to be? What kind of leader do you want to be? You don't have to accept the definitions that are put upon us. And it's work and it's effort, and you want to do that with support, right? It's not an easy thing to do, but it's entirely possible, right? I do not define being a good mom as how well I clean the floors or, do the laundry. Like that's a terrible definition of being a good mom to me, right? And so sometimes we don't have enough clean laundry, I will admit, right? But also I think about, well, what did I do with my time instead of doing the laundry? Oh yeah, I actually did really meaningful things. I hung out with my kid. I didn't yell at them. I did, important work. And so that's how I chose to spend my time. And if you want to judge me about my messy house, go ahead. But I'm at peace with it because I chose it deliberately based on who I want to be in the world.
Yeah.
Oh, so important. I grew up in a household where you were measured by the cleanliness of your floor and your oven. So Jennifer, what simple wisdom do you offer women on how to use intuition to make decisions?
Yeah, I think previously I probably would have answered this question differently, but now I'm realizing that our intuition gets stronger through experience. So I always will tell women that say to me, I don't know where my intuition is and I feel like I lost it. I'll guide them back to a time, and many times at that, where they actually used their intuition and it did something positive. It paid off, or they learned something, or they grew in some way. And every single woman I've ever asked that question, they can always think of something. And so it reminds me the idea of we need to be experiencing. We came here as human beings to experience the world. That's why we're here, right? To experience all the gamut of emotions and all the different things that we go through in our day-to-day lives. And so when we get moments where our intuition actually works, we then can bank those. We can put them in the bank of, oh, it's strong. I actually used it and it did something. And it pushes us outside of our comfort zone. So what I realize is like each little experience that you put in that bank of like your intuition, you then realize that voice gets stronger. And then the voice of fear gets quieter. So I'll always say, just try, take a risk, put yourself out there in a way, do one small thing that you can, and notice what the impact is on either how it guided you, how you grew, how you learned from the mistake or what you thought was a mistake. And it pays off in the end.
Beautiful. Dana, same question.
Yep. So I would say, again, we have this notion in Western society, dominant Western society, that being independent is like the best, highest actualized self, right? That if you're independent, and actually it's not the highest functioning of a human, right? Again, there's some people who really, don't care what other people think. And sometimes we call them psychopaths, right? So it's not necessarily a good thing to be socially isolated. And so, there's studies showing that when we feel heard and understood, when we feel like connected to other people who get us and who have our backs, that it actually changes our perceptions of the world. So they have these studies where they stand at the bottom of a hill and you estimate how tall the hill is. And if you're there with a loved one, we will estimate the hill as being less, not as high as if you're there all by yourself. Then they have some studies where they have people carry a backpack and estimate the weight of the backpack. And if you're with loved ones, we will estimate the weight of the backpack as weighing less than if we're there all by ourselves. Then they have some studies where they put people in a functional MRI and administer a standardized shock to their toes. And so you can see the pain receptors of the brain light up. And if you're holding the hand of a loved one, your pain receptors literally do not light up as much as if you're there by yourself. Now, if you're holding the hand of someone you have a bad relationship with, it's actually worse than being all by yourself. So this is not about be with someone no matter what. It's about having those trusting, safe relationships. But when we have them, the obstacles don't seem as big, the burdens don't seem as heavy, and the pain doesn't seem as bad. And so this is a skill that we actually need to learn to do. The opposite of dependency is connection, right? We need connection. And so it's important for us to find your communities, find people, right? You have to open up a little bit and be messy to make those true connections where you benefit from that effect. And so that would be my tip to give.
Wow. I'm, both of you, honestly, I really wanted you to come on the show and, have a good fight, but it feels like
unfortunately we agreed on a whole bunch of stuff.
Totally.
You're pretty much, you're much agreeing. I'll have to find two other guests that have a big fight. But so, as you know, this podcast is about women on wisdom, and it's about bridging the equality gap. That's 132 years, multiple generations. And so I think a lot of us think that we have to do something really drastic going out into the world, or it's got to be part, like this comes from the World Economic Forum, this study, what the years of gap was and how it's measured and all the rest. But what are this, for each one of you, how are you bridging the gap in your life? What are the simple things that you're doing to bridge the gap?
I mean, for me, it's not a simple thing, but it's simple in practice, but I'm really trying to notice the voice of fear that I have. That's my biggest thing. In all of the work I do, in every experience that I do, in all the ways I show up for myself and my family and my friends and the clients that I have, it's really noticing that voice of fear, because what I'm learning is I have a lot of stories that I've created, right? About what I believe to be true, about, who I am and how I show up and how other people show up. And I'm realizing a lot of those stories aren't true. And so I'm learning that as I go through this process of becoming who I'm here to be, the gap is getting smaller between me and the connections to other people, just by nature of noticing that part of me that wants to stay separated, that wants to be in fear, and developing that awareness, like minute by minute, to slow myself down, really think about how I want to show up, and then doing that and showing up in the world in the best way I can with my heart as open as possible.
Oh, that's beautiful. Dana.
Yeah, I would say that, my efforts are really about leading a value-driven life, and that's about being, aware and conscious and intentional about who I'm being in the world. And that really does not mean being perfect, right? It's really about being an authentic, messy human, and I'm sure you've had the experience where you tell somebody like, oh, actually, I'm a disaster about this thing. And they say, oh, thank goodness. Like, thank goodness you're not perfect, right?
Yes.
And we've all had those, because actually it's a terrible thing to be perfect, and it's very hard to connect with, and you can't make authentic relationships that way, right? You need the messiness to be human. And so values are interesting also because they're not the same thing as goals, where goals like happen or don't happen. Values are like a compass. They're like an ongoing way of showing up. And so it matters all the little steps, right? As well as the big ones. And there's no finish line. You never kind of get there. You're never done. It's always matters about how you're trying to show up. And so being intentional about that, and being, showing a different way of how you can be, right? So that it's different than what the narrative is about who we need to be. That gives, it lets people see that there could be another way. But it's about being the messy and authenticness of living a big life means that there's lots of challenge and difficulty, and things go wrong, and right. And so it's showing all of those things is what I try to do, and not get stuck in, my little voice also says, be perfect, right? As many of our voices do in our heads. And so, but that's, what I wanted to do to try to change the perceptions people have and the way they're thinking about moving through the world themselves. And then I
Wow.
also like to infiltrate and like then change the system once I get there, right? Once I have enough power, then I change the system rather than, leaving it as is. And so that's also, that's why we need people to pursue positions of power so that they can change the system.
Yeah, I love the idea of, not being perfect and showing your messiness. And, you can that opens you up to having deeper conversations with other women and accessing those things, intuition, and stepping into Jennifer, you said stepping into your fear and allowing that to happen. Jennifer and Dana, I'd like to thank you both very much. You're both so inspiring, and certainly two people that I love to hear your opinions, and I love this conversation. We could probably go on for a really long time, but I'd like to say thank you. I know I'd love to have you both back, and I'd also like to say thank you to our producer, Spencer Diver, on the other end, making sure that it all works out easily and effortlessly. And have a wonderful day. We are at a crucial juncture in history, and our equality is not a nice to have. It is now beyond negotiation. This is our future, our fight.
This episode of Women on Wisdom is sponsored by TalentWise Collective, a global talent development company that curates solutions for your organization's needs and culture. Please note that the opinions and comments of the guests or hosts may not align with TalentWise Collective. If you are interested in having Sandra speak at an event, or wish to reach out for any other inquiries, you can connect through our email at connecttwc@talentwisecollective.com. That is, connecttwc@talentwisecollective.com. Thank you.